Chapter 1. I woke up inside a novel. As a maid, the first thing Julia noticed was the smell: dust, old wood, and something faintly sour, like wet laundry, forgotten for days. The second thing she noticed was pain. Not normal pain. Not "I slept wrong" pain. No, this felt like someone had folded her into a suitcase and kicked her down a hill. Julia groaned and buried her face deeper into the rough pillow. 5 more minutes. No phone buzz beside her. No cars outside. No sound of rain tapping against her apartment window. Slowly, Julia opened her eyes. A cracked wooden ceiling stared back at her. She blinked. That is definitely not my ceiling. Julia sat up too quickly and immediately regretted every life decision that led to this moment. Her head spun painfully as she looked around the tiny room. Stone walls, a crooked wooden table, a candle burning weakly beside a narrow bed, and hanging neatly near the door a maid uniform. Julia stared at it, then at herself, then back at the uniform. No, her voice sounded younger, smaller. Her heartbeat sped up. She stumbled toward the mirror hanging beside the window. A girl stared back at her. Messy brown hair framed a tired young face, slightly wavy from sleep. Her eyes were a vivid deep green, sharp even beneath the dark circles under them. She looked about 15 years old, too young to look this exhausted already. Julia slowly touched her cheek. The reflection copied her. Why do I look like an underpaid side character? Memories slammed into her head all at once. The hospital, the poison, the burning in her throat, the terrifying sound of machines flatlining, then darkness, and now another person's memories mixed with hers. Julia Bell, 15 years old, maid, servant, orphan, works 14 hours a day, paid in disappointment and leftover bread. Julia stared at the ceiling, hopelessly. I survived death for this? Then another realization hit her. The palace, the uniforms, the names. Her eyes widened. Oh no, this wasn't just reincarnation. She had woken up inside a novel. A Rose for the Fallen Crown, a fantasy romance novel she had read obsessively before dying. A story about betrayal, politics, and a lonely princess who eventually became the feared villainess of the empire. Julia remembered crying while reading it, mostly because every adult in the story acted like they shared one collective brain cell, and somehow out of every possible role she became a maid, not the heroine, not the villainess, not even a noble extra with pretty dresses and manageable trauma. A maid, a regular maid. Julia slowly dropped backward onto the bed, dramatically. This is the worst gachapon of all time. Bang. The door burst open. Julia, an older maid, glared at her with enough anger to power a small village. Why are you still lying around? Julia blinked sleepily. Because emotionally I'm still dead? The woman looked disturbed. Hurry up. The head maid is already furious. She threw an apron directly at Julia's face. You're serving breakfast to the princess today. The princess. Julia froze. Instantly. Princess Evelina de Lier, the neglected child hidden away in the northern townhouse, only 9 years old, bullied by nobles, ignored by the emperor, feared for rumors she didn't even understand, and eventually in the original novel, she became the villainess everyone hated. Julia remembered wanting to personally fight every adult character while reading. Now she finally understood why. The older maid shoved a silver tray into her hands. Move already. Julia looked down, then stopped walking immediately. Excuse me? The bowl contained gray soup that looked genuinely cursed. The bread was burnt black around the edges, and the vegetables looked like they had lost the will to live 3 days ago. Julia stared in horror. This is food? It's for the abandoned princess, another servant replied casually, as if she deserves anything expensive. The maids laughed. Julia did not. A slow wave of anger curled in her stomach. In the novel, Evelina's suffering had been sad, but seeing it in real life, it was infuriating. She's 9, Julia muttered. One maid rolled her eyes. Then she's old enough to eat soup. This soup could dissolve metal. The servant ignored her completely. Julia sighed dramatically and carried the tray through the palace halls. The northern townhouse stood isolated from the main palace, hidden behind rusted gates and overgrown hedges. Even the air felt colder there somehow. Nobody visited this place willingly. Nobody cared enough to Julia pushed open the bedroom door carefully. Warm sunlight spilled across the floor, and there, near the tall window, sat the princess. Little Evelina looked tiny in the oversized chair, her small hands resting carefully on a book in her lap. Soft silver blonde hair shimmered in the sunlight, almost glowing against her pale skin. She was beautiful, but painfully thin, the kind of thinness that came from skipped meals and quiet suffering. When Evelina noticed Julia enter, she sat straighter immediately. "You may leave the tray there," she said, softly, too softly, like she was afraid speaking too loudly would upset someone. Julia walked closer slowly, then looked down at the tray. Again, her anger exploded instantly. No child should eat this, especially not one who already looked so fragile. Evelina noticed her staring and lowered her eyes. Quietly, "It's all right," the little princess whispered. "I'm used to it." That sentence nearly destroyed Julia emotionally. "Used to it?" Before Julia could answer, the door opened sharply. The head maid entered, with 2 servants following behind her. "Well?" the woman snapped impatiently. "Why are you standing there?" Julia looked at her. Silently, the head maid frowned harder. "Serve the princess her meal." Julia slowly picked up the soup bowl. The room grew quiet. Then she smiled sweetly, and threw the soup directly into the head maid's face. Splash. Silence. Complete silence. Gray soup dripped slowly down the woman's forehead. One servant gasped so hard she nearly folded in half. "Julia!" the head maid shrieked. "What is the meaning of this nonsense?" Julia calmly set the empty bowl onto the tray. "The meaning," she replied, "is that Her Highness deserves actual food instead of haunted swamp water." The servant stared at her in horror. The head maid looked seconds away from exploding. "You insolent little brat." "Oh, I'm not done yet." Julia pointed dramatically toward the tray. "Bring meat." Another finger. Fresh salad. Another. Warm bread. And fruit juice. The servants looked completely stunned. Julia crossed her arms. "She's a princess, not a sewer goblin. How dare you speak to me like this? How dare you feed spoiled soup to a 9-year-old child?" The room fell silent again. In the corner, Evelina stared at Julia with huge blue eyes filled with shock. No one had ever defended her before. Not once. Julia looked down at the tiny princess. The way she tried to make herself smaller. The way she apologized, without words, simply for existing. And suddenly Julia understood something. This little girl was never born evil. The world simply treated her cruelly until she became one. Julia slowly knelt in front of Evelina. Her green eyes softened. "Your Highness," she said gently, "from now on, nobody's feeding you garbage again."